The wind came off the ridge that morning carrying the smell of char and old rain, and Clara Doss knew before she reached the gate that something in her life had already changed. A notice was nailed to the crossbar, its paper curling at the edges. Notice of debt. Split ELM Ranch TO be sold at public auction, 30 days. She had never signed a debt in her life. Inside her own kitchen, a stranger waited with her coffee cup in his hand, boots crossed on her husband's chair. Silas Rehnquist smiled like a man who already owned the room, because in his mind he did. He spoke of hardship, of mercy, of how a woman alone might avoid the shame of auction, if she married sensibly and soon. "I can't," she whispered. "I'm a widow." He laughed low and easy. "Good. I won't have to duel anyone for you. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from today? Wherever you are, sending love your way." What Rehnquist did not know was that Clara's late husband had once practiced law in Cheyenne and had taught his wife to read a contract the way other women read scripture. She turned to the last page of his forged paper and found a witness signature she recognized. Her own foreman's name, Del Rourke. Split Elm Ranch sat in a bowl of gold grass beneath the Wind River foothills, named for the great cracked elm tree at its center, the only one for 40 miles that had survived lightning and still bloomed each spring. Wade Doss had planted the first fence posts around it 11 years ago, back when he still wore a lawyer's collar and carried a lawyer's caution in his pockets. He had come west to build something that could not be argued away in a courtroom. He had built it with Clara beside him, hand over hand, brand by brand, the D-bar, burned into hide after hide until it meant something in 3 counties. For months ago, Wade had ridden out to check the north fence line during a storm and had not come home. Amos Pike found him at first light, thrown and still, his horse gone missing until it wandered back 2 days later without its saddle. The county called it misfortune. Clara had wanted to believe that word. She had buried her husband beneath the split elm and told herself that grief, at least, was an honest thing, even when nothing else in the world seemed to be. Since then she had run 600 head of cattle with 12 hands, through a drought that cracked the creek bed and a winter that took 11 calves. She had done it without complaint because complaint was a language Wade never taught her, and because split elm was not simply land, it was the only proof left that his life had mattered. Now Silas Rehnquist sat in her kitchen with a contract that said Wade owed him $4,000, secured against the ranch, signed 8 days before her husband died. She remembered the real loan. $500, borrowed from the bank 2 winters back for feed, half of it already paid. She remembered because she had written the payments in the ledger herself, in her own hand, at her own kitchen table. "This isn't Wade's signature," she said quietly, setting the coffee down so she would not throw it. Rehnquist only smiled wider. "Grief plays tricks on memory, Mrs. Doss. The notary swears otherwise. So does the bank. Then I'll ask them myself." "You're welcome to." He rose, unbothered, and set his hat back on his head with the ease of a man who had never once been told no and made it stick. 30 days, ma'am. After that, the county does the asking, and I don't imagine they'll be as gentle as I've been." He left the way confident men always leave a room, without looking back, because looking back would mean the possibility that something behind him mattered. Clara stood in her doorway and watched his horse kick dust down the long road toward town, and something old and quiet woke up inside her, something that had nothing to do with grief. She could have taken the offer folded inside his politeness. She could have sold, married into safety, gone back to her sister in Ohio where widows were allowed to simply disappear into other people's households. The thought lasted the length of one breath. Then she looked past the yard to the split elm, its shadow long over her husband's grave, and understood there was no version of leaving that did not also mean losing the only thing of Wade's still standing in the world. She rode to town that same afternoon. Foss, the bank clerk, would not meet her eyes at first. He shuffled ledgers before finally admitting, in the careful voice of a man protecting his own position, that the original $500 note had been sold 3 weeks earlier, sold to Silas Rehnquist, who had paid the balance in full and, according to the paperwork now on file, subsequently renegotiated the terms directly with the debtor before his passing. Wade was already dead 3 weeks ago when this was renegotiated? Clara asked. Foss did not answer. He closed the ledger instead. The way men close doors they don't want opened again. She rode home past sundown, the sky bruising purple over the ridge, and found two of her hands, young Reuben and old Casey, already packing their saddlebags in the bunkhouse, refusing to explain why. Their pay pouches heavier than 2 weeks' wages should have made them. They would not look at her either. That night, Clara sat at her kitchen table with the false contract spread before her under lantern light, comparing every loop of ink to letters Wade had written her a decade earlier, letters from Cheyenne, when he was only a young lawyer courting a schoolteacher's daughter with promises of open land and honest work. The capital W did not match. Not even close once she knew to look. Someone had practiced Wade's hand and gotten almost everything right. Almost. Outside, the wind pushed against the shutters like something testing the latch, patient, unhurried, certain it would find a way in eventually. Clara understood, staring at that imperfect forgery, that this was not the work of one greedy man moving alone. Men did not buy debts in secret, bribe hands to vanish, and forge signatures with steady confidence unless they had already done it before, and gotten away with it, and built a system around never being caught. Someone had planned this the way a rancher plans a season. Early, patiently, counting on a widow's grief to slow her down long enough to lose everything before she understood what was happening. She folded the contract carefully, the way Wade had once taught her to fold evidence that would matter later, and blew out the lamp. 30 days was not much time. It would have to be enough. Silas Rehnquist had not always owned half the county. 15 years earlier, he had arrived in Redwater Flats with 2 wagons and a talent for arithmetic that favored himself, and he had spent every year since turning that talent into leverage, buying failing notes at half their value, calling them due the moment a rancher's luck turned, absorbing land the way a river absorbs smaller streams during flood season. By the time Clara understood what she was up against, Rehnquist Cattle Company controlled the only working bank in 3 towns, half the feed contracts along the territorial road, and, more quietly, more dangerously, the loyalty of Sheriff Ordell Briggs, whose modest home had somehow acquired a new roof the same season Rehnquist's influence over county contracts had grown. Clara rode into town the morning after finding the ledger discrepancy and asked the sheriff plainly whether a man could simply purchase a dead man's debt and inflate it 8-fold. Briggs turned his hat in his hands the way men do when they already know their answer will disappoint. Contracts signed, ma'am. Notarized proper, filed proper. Ain't a lawman's place to go picking apart paper that's already gone through the county recorder. The signature is forged. Sheriff, that's a mighty serious thing to say about a respected businessman. He said it gently, almost kindly, which made it worse. You'd need more than your own say-so, Mrs. Doss. A judge'd want proof. Real proof. She left his office understanding something she would carry through everything that followed. The law in Redwater Flats was not broken. It was simply owned the way Rehnquist owned the feed contracts and the bank and, apparently, 2 of her own hands' silence. That evening she found Amos Pike sitting alone by the corral, not meeting her eye, a small leather pouch heavier than his usual pay sitting untouched on the fence rail beside him. They came by this afternoon, he said, before she could ask. Fellow works for Rehnquist. Said there was $40 in it for me if I saddled up and rode on before the month's out. Didn't even pretend it was about anything but keeping quiet. Clara sat beside him, the 2 of them watching the horses move slow circles in the dusk. My Ellie's been coughing bad all winter, Amos admitted. $40 buys medicine I can't otherwise get. I can help with that, Clara said. Not with money I don't have, but I can send to Doc Heron myself, put it on my account, worry about paying it later. What I can't do is run this ranch with hands who've already decided to be gone before the fight starts. Amos looked at the pouch a long while. Then he picked it up, walked to the fence line, and threw it into the dark toward the road Rehnquist's man had ridden in on. Wade Doss paid me fair every season for 9 years and never once made me feel like charity, he said. I reckon I owe his wife more than $40 can buy me out of. It was not much, one aging wrangler with a bad knee and a sick daughter, but it was the first ground Clara had reclaimed since. The notice had gone up on her gate, and it felt that night like more than it should have. She did not sleep easily. Somewhere past midnight she rose for water and found the porch door unlatched, though she was certain she had barred it. Nailed to the wood at eye level was a folded scrap of paper that had not been there at supper. Watch who rides closest to the fire. No signature. No need for one. She thought immediately of Del Rourke, her foreman, Wade's oldest hire, a man who had taught her to read brands before she'd learned to read the county road map, whose name sat in careful ink as witness on a fraudulent contract she had not yet found the courage to ask him about directly. She found him the next morning mending tack in the barn, and set the contract on the workbench between them without a word. Del's hands stopped moving. He stared at his own signature for a long moment before speaking. "That's not my writing," he said, but his voice had gone thin, and his eyes would not lift from the page. "Delaware. I said it's not mine, Clara." He set the leather down too carefully, like a man handling something that might break or explode. "You ought to be asking Rehnquist's people, not me. I've been loyal to this ranch since before you wore Wade's ring." She wanted badly to believe him. She had known this man half her married life. But she had also learned, in 30 years on this earth and 11 of them on this ranch, that guilt and grief wear remarkably similar faces, and that the men who lie best are usually the ones who have practiced lying to themselves first. "I hope that's true," she said quietly. "Because if it isn't, Del, I need you to understand I will find out. And I would rather hear it from you than from a stranger's paper." He said nothing more. He picked the leather back up, and his hands, she noticed, did not stop trembling for the rest of the morning. She rode out to the north pasture that afternoon with more questions than answers, and the uneasy certainty, settling cold in her chest, that whatever threat had come against Split Elm Ranch had not arrived from the outside alone. It had walked through her gate long before the notice ever had. Clara had never told anyone in Redwater Flats what her husband had truly been before he became a rancher, because in the territory a man's past mattered less than his cattle count, and she had let that silence protect them both. But now, alone at the kitchen table with lantern light pooling over paper, she let herself remember every hour Wade had spent teaching her. Not out of romance, but out of the plain practical fear that a woman alone on frontier land needed to know how paper could be turned into a weapon. "A signature is a habit," he used to say, guiding her hand over his own old letters. "A man's habits don't change even when he's trying to hide them. Look for where the hand hesitates. Forgers hesitate where the real man never would." She spread 6 of Wade's genuine documents across the table beside the false contract. 2 land deeds, 3 old letters, and their marriage certificate, and studied the capital W in each. In every true signature, Wade's pen lifted after the first stroke, a small habit from his lawyering days, a flourish he'd never lost. On the forged contract, the W ran unbroken, smooth and hurried, written by a hand that did not know it needed to lift at all. It was not much, but it was proof enough to build from. The next morning she rode into town before sunrise and found Nettie Cole already at the telegraph office, coffee steaming beside the brass key. Nettie had known Clara since they were both new brides in a town that measured women by their husbands' cattle counts, and she asked no questions when Clara requested a message sent to the territorial recorder's office in Cheyenne, asking whether any debt against Split Elm Ranch had been filed prior to Wade Doss's death. The reply came 2 days later, tapped out in patient code that Nettie translated word by careful word. No such filing exists in this office prior to stated date. Only recording on file dated 11 days after death of debtor. 11 days after Wade was buried. Someone had filed a debt he could not have signed while breathing. Clara rode home with the telegram folded against her heart, and might have gone straight to the sheriff with it, had she not noticed, crossing the north pasture, something that stopped her cold. A stretch of her own fence line, brush-covered and clumsy in its concealment, where 3 rails had been quietly removed and replaced without a single broken post to show for it. Hoofprints, several nights old and rain-softened, led from the gap toward Rehnquist Range, and back again more than once. No stampede had torn that gate open. No storm had loosened those rails. Someone with a key to the ranch's rhythms. Someone who knew when the night hands slept and when they didn't. Had been moving cattle out quietly for weeks, just enough head at a time to never be missed against 600. She counted that evening with Amos, comparing tally against last season's true numbers. 31 head gone, not stolen in a raid. Bled out slow, the way a wound bleeds a man dry before he notices he's dying. Only a handful of people knew the gate's exact location, hidden as it was behind a fold of land invisible from the house. Amos was one. She was another. Del Rourke was the third. She found him that night at the bunkhouse, and this time she did not set paper between them. She only told him what she'd found. The fence, the tracks, the 31 missing head, and watched something in him finally break open like a dam too long strained. "My brother Tam," he said, voice cracking. "He's been in deep with Rehnquist's saloon since spring. Owes more than he'll ever earn honest. Rehnquist's man came to me in June, said Tam be beaten half to death, maybe worse, unless I helped move a little stock now and then, and put my name where they told me to. Said it was only paperwork. Said nobody'd get hurt by it." He looked up, eyes wet in the lantern light. "I didn't know it'd cost you the whole ranch, Clara. I swear it on Wade's grave, I didn't know. You knew enough to hide it from me for months. I was scared." He said it plainly, without excuse. "I've been scared since June, and I let that fear make me into a man I don't recognize." She wanted to hate him cleanly, the way hatred is supposed to work. Simple, whole, without complication. But watching him weep in the lantern light, she understood only that fear had made a coward of a good man, the same way grief had nearly made a quitter of her, and that the real architect of both their suffering was still riding free across the county with a lawyer's smile and a forger's patience. "You're going to help me fix this," she said. "Not because I trust you yet. Because you owe Wade that much, and because I intend to make Silas Rehnquist pay for every hour of fear he's put into good men." Del nodded, wiping his face with the back of a shaking hand. 22 days remained before the auction. Somewhere across the ridge, Silas Rehnquist slept easy in a house built from other men's ruin. Certain the widow at Split Elm had neither the proof nor the will to reach him. He was about to learn how wrong a confident man could be. Word travels strange distances in cattle country, carried less by tongues than by silences. A hand who stops meeting your eyes, a rider who takes the long way around your fence line instead of the short one. Clara did not know exactly how Rehnquist learned that his foreman-turned-informant had confessed, but she felt the shift in the air 2 days after Dell's confession, the way ranchers feel weather changing before the sky admits it. Dell disappeared from the bunkhouse that evening without a word, and though Clara told herself he'd simply gone to check the herd, dread sat heavy in her chest through supper and after. The fire started a little past midnight. She woke to Amos pounding on her door, his voice raw with smoke already. The sky beyond her window gone the wrong color of orange. The hay barn was burning. Not smoldering from carelessness, but burning fast and even along all 4 walls. The unmistakable signature of coal oil thrown deliberate and wide. She ran barefoot into chaos. Riders she did not recognize moved through the yard in the firelight, driving her cattle through a cut section of the home fence, whooping and firing pistols into the dark to keep the herd running blind and terrified into the night. Amos threw himself toward the corral to free the horses before the flame could reach them and took a bullet across his shoulder for the effort, spinning him hard into the dirt. He did not fall. He kept moving, blood soaking dark through his shirt, until every horse was loose and running free of the burning rails. Clara fought the fire alongside her remaining hands with wet blankets and buckets from the well, though she knew within minutes it was already a losing effort. The hay was too dry, the wind too willing, and the barn that had stood since Wade first raised its frame collapsed inward just before dawn in a slow, groaning surrender that she felt in her chest more than heard with her ears. Dell returned near sunrise, bloodied and limping, having ridden out to warn the farhands and been caught instead by a man Clara would later learn was named Reeve Calder, one of Rehnquist's hired enforcers. Dell had fought him off just long enough to escape with his life, though not before Calder had beaten him badly enough that he could barely stay mounted for the ride home. Before he collapsed in the yard, He pressed something into Clara's hand. A small brass key. Ledger, he managed through split lips. Real one. Rehnquist's true numbers. Every ranch he's bled the same way we have. Took it from his office weeks back, before I lost my nerve to use it. Buried the strongbox under the old smokehouse floor before they caught me. Key's yours now. Then he passed out in the mud, and Clara had no time to ask him anything further, because dawn had come fully now, gray and merciless, showing her everything the night had taken. The barn was ash and blackened bone. Winter's feed store, months of careful saving, was gone entirely. Half her herd had scattered wide into country. She did not have hands enough left to search. Amos sat against the well housing, shoulder wrapped tight in torn cloth, pale but alive. Dell lay unconscious in the yard, breathing shallow. Two more hands, frightened past reason by gunfire and flame, had already saddled up and ridden for town before the sun fully cleared the ridge, leaving her with barely enough people to bury a man, let alone run a ranch. Rain began to fall as the sky lightened further, thin and cold, turning the ash to gray paste beneath her boots. Clara stood in the wreckage of everything she and Wade had built, 12 days remaining before the auction. No barn, no feed, half a herd, a wounded foreman, an unconscious informant, and a debt she still could not prove was false in any way a judge in this county would readily accept. She thought, standing there, of simply letting it end. Of writing to her sister in Ohio, admitting defeat, going somewhere the wind did not carry the smell of burned hay and old grief in equal measure. She thought of it for the length of one long, rain-soaked breath. Then she looked toward the split elm at the center of the property, its branches dark and dripping, Wade's grave a darker shadow beneath it, and understood that surrender now would mean every fire Rehnquist had ever set. This one, and whatever fire had truly taken her husband from her in a storm 11 months ago, would have won completely. She was not finished. She had simply not yet found the shape her fight needed to take. Somewhere beneath the ruined smokehouse floor, a strongbox waited with the truth locked inside it. It was time to dig it up. They pulled the strongbox from beneath the smokehouse floor at dusk, mud-caked and heavy, and Clara's hands shook as she fit Dell's brass key into the lock. Inside lay a second ledger, far more honest than the one filed with the county. Rehnquist's true numbers, written in his own unmistakable hand, tracking every debt he had purchased below value, every signature he had practiced before forging, every rancher along Redwater Creek. He had bled slowly the same way he had bled Split Elm. 3 other names appeared in those pages beside Wade's. 3 other families who had lost land to contracts they, too, had never truly signed. Beneath the ledger sat a single folded sheet that stopped Clara's breath entirely. A note, unsent, in Rehnquist's own hand, dated the week of Wade's death. Handled North Ridge same as discussed. Horse spooked clean, no witnesses. Doss won't be filing that water complaint with the territory now. She sat a long while in the ruined smokehouse with rain still ticking against the roof, the note trembling in her fingers, understanding at last what she had suspected without daring to name. That Wade had discovered Rehnquist's water diversion scheme, had intended to report it to the Territorial Land Office, and had been silenced on a storm-dark ridge before he ever got the chance. Something in her went very still and very cold. She thought of Wade's old pistol, kept oiled and loaded in the bedroom chest since his death, and she thought of riding to Rehnquist's house that same night and finishing what that note described, ending him the way he had ended her husband, quiet and final beneath a dark sky. She sat with that thought for a long time, longer than she was proud of afterward. It was Amos, still pale from his wound, who found her there near midnight and sat beside her without asking what she'd found, seeming to understand from her face alone that it was something terrible. Wade once told me, she said finally, that the law was slow and imperfect and sometimes cowardly, but that it was the only thing standing between a frontier and men simply taking whatever they were strong enough to take. He believed that even when it failed him personally, it mattered that it kept trying to exist. And now, Amos asked, now I understand exactly how he died, and I have a loaded gun and every reason in this world to use it. She turned the note over in her hands. But if I ride out tonight and kill him, Amos, the ranch is still lost. The debt is still filed. Dell still lives afraid the rest of his life. Those other 3 families never get their land back. I'd have my revenge, and everyone left standing would still be ruined. So what do we do instead? We make sure the whole county sees exactly what he is, in the light, where he can't buy his way out of it. We use his own ledger against him. We let the law do the one thing it's actually good for, bearing witness in public where cowardice can't hide. She did not tell Amos, not fully, how much it cost her to choose this, how some small furious part of her would carry Wade's death like an unanswered debt for the rest of her life regardless of what happened to Rehnquist. Justice, she was learning, did not erase grief. It only refused to let grief become one more thing Rehnquist got to take from her. The following 2 days moved fast and careful. Nettie Cole sent telegrams to the 2 other defrauded ranchers named in the ledger, both of whom agreed, cautiously, to appear in town on auction day. Dell, healing slow but resolved, agreed to testify publicly to the coercion, whatever it cost him. Amos, arm bound tight, insisted on riding at her side regardless of the wound. Word reached them that Judge Mercer Holt, riding circuit through the territory, would be in Redwater Flats that same week to hear scheduled county matters, including, unavoidably, the foreclosure auction itself. Clara did not sleep the night before. She sat instead at the kitchen table where this had all begun: the false contract, the true ledger, the telegram from Cheyenne, and Rehnquist's own damning note laid out before her in careful order, exactly the way Wade had once taught her to organize evidence that needed to survive a room full of doubting men. At first light, she dressed in her plainest dark clothes, pinned her hair the way she had for Wade's funeral, and rode into Redwater Flats with Amos on one side and Dell, pale but upright, on the other, a strong box of truth riding behind them in the wagon bed. Across the street from the bank, Silas Rehnquist stood in the gathering crowd, hat tilted back, smiling at her the way a man smiles when he believes the outcome is already decided. He had no idea the ground beneath him had already shifted. The auctioneer had barely raised his gavel when Clara stepped forward through the gathered crowd, the strongbox held against her hip, and asked Judge Holt for leave to speak before any bidding began. The judge, a lean gray man with tired eyes that had clearly seen every kind of frontier dishonesty at least twice, granted it with a small nod. She set 2 documents side by side on the auctioneer's table, the forged contract and a genuine letter in Wade's true hand, and asked the crowd, plainly, to look at the capital W in each. Murmurs moved through the gathered townsfolk like wind through dry grass. Nettie Cole stepped forward next and read aloud the telegram from the territorial recorder's office, confirming no debt had existed against Split Elm Ranch before Wade Doss's death. Rehnquist's smile had not yet fully broken, though it had thinned considerably. "Grief has made the widow imaginative," he said to the crowd, his voice smooth as ever. "A signature dispute proves nothing." "Then perhaps this will," Clara said, and opened the strongbox. She laid out the true ledger, page by page, Rehnquist's own handwriting detailing every fraudulent purchase across 3 ranches, including the 2 families standing now at the edge of the crowd, who stepped forward without needing to be asked, confirming their own losses in voices shaking with long-suppressed anger. Del Rourke came forward next, standing straighter than Clara had seen him in weeks, and told the gathered town plainly how he had been coerced through his brother's debt into forging a witness signature. His voice cracking only once, when he apologized directly to Clara in front of everyone. Then Clara produced the final page, Rehnquist's own note, describing Wade's death as no accident at all. The crowd's murmur died into something colder and more absolute, silence. Rehnquist's composure finally broke. "This is theft," he snarled, stepping toward the table. "Stolen property inadmissible." "Sheriff Briggs," Judge Holt said quietly, without raising his voice at all, "you will detain Mr. Rehnquist pending formal charges of fraud, forgery, and conspiracy in the death of Wade Doss." Something in Briggs's face shifted, shame, perhaps, or simple fear of being caught standing on the wrong side of a truth the whole town had just witnessed. He stepped forward toward Rehnquist. Rehnquist did not wait to be taken. His hand moved fast toward the pistol at his hip, and the crowd scattered backward with a collective gasp. Clara felt Wade's old revolver heavy at her own belt, felt her hand twitch toward it in the space of one furious heartbeat, and did not draw it. Dell did not hesitate the same way. He threw himself between Rehnquist's leveled pistol and Clara a half-second before the shot cracked out across the street, taking the bullet meant for her high in the chest, and folded to the dusty boards without a sound. Amos, wounded arm and all, tackled Rehnquist from the side with the last of his strength, and two townsmen who had watched their neighbor's ledger read aloud moments before finished pinning him to the ground before Briggs even reached them. Clara knelt in the dust beside Dell, pressing her hands uselessly against a wound too deep for pressing to matter, and held him as the fight went out of the street around them, and the only sound left was distant thunder rolling down off the ridge, indifferent to everything that had just happened beneath it. "Tell Tam," Dell whispered. "I paid what I owed." He did not speak again. Rehnquist, dragged upright and bound, said nothing at all. His silence, at last, worth more to the gathered town than any confession could have been. They buried Del Rourke beneath the split elm, a few careful paces from Wade's own grave, and Clara stood over both markers a long while that evening, understanding for the first time that justice, once it finally arrived, rarely arrived clean. Silas Rehnquist was taken to the territorial seat within the week to stand trial for fraud, forgery, and conspiracy in Wade Doss's death. The trial itself took little time. His own ledger did most of the talking a courtroom required. He was sentenced to the territorial prison at Laramie, where word later reached Redwater Flats that his cattle company had already collapsed into pieces, sold off to the very ranchers he had once bled dry. The auction never happened. Judge Holt voided the false debt on the spot, and the two other defrauded families reclaimed land and water rights they had long believed lost for good. Split Elm's barn was rebuilt that same season, raised in 4 days by neighbors who had watched the whole ugly truth unfold in the street and found, afterward, that they owed the widow more than polite sympathy. Amos Pike healed slow but full, and took on the foreman's title Dell had once carried, though he never once let anyone forget whose name still belonged on that roll in memory. Clara Doss did not leave Redwater Flats. She did not marry again, though not for lack of quiet offers from men who had finally noticed, too late, what kind of woman had been living quietly among them all along. She ran Split Elm Ranch for 11 more years and told this story, when she told it at all, without pride and without appetite for revenge she had chosen, in the end, not to take. Would you have chosen justice, or taken revenge with your own hands? Rain still comes to Redwater Flats most every spring, softening the dust along the old fence line, filling the creek that once ran dry by another man's hand. And when it does, if you walk far enough out past the split elm and its two quiet graves, you will still find the gatepost standing where Wade Doss first raised it, the brand burned deep and unbroken into the wood, D over bar, the only mark in that whole ugly business Silas Rehnquist never once managed to forge.